Welcome to our personal statement workshop. We're so glad to have you here. And we're really glad to have our three amazing speakers who will be answering all your questions and sharing all their knowledge about the residency process. And this workshop is brought to you by the National APANSA Leadership Committee. So hope you enjoy. So our three speakers are Dr. Grace Kajita, Dr. Sreekala Raghavan, and Dr. Indu Partha. And they'll be talking about different aspects of the residency application and also doing a Q&A with everyone at the end. And Dr. Raghavan is, oh, Rihanna, can you advance the slides, please? Okay, there we go. Dr. Raghavan, if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks so much. I'm Sri Raghavan. I am an Associate Program Director for Internal Medicine Residency at Mount Sinai Morningside-West, which is in New York. And I'm excited to be here and joining us.
Great, thank you for coming. And Dr. Partha.
Hi, everybody. I'm Indu Partha. I am also an Associate Program Director for our Internal Medicine Residency program here in Tucson at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. Super excited to be here, and I'm thankful to the organizers for putting on this event.
Great, we're so glad to have you. And finally, Dr. Kajita.
Sorry, I had a little trouble unmuting there. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Grace Kajita. I am the Program Director for the Internal Medicine Residency Program at Montefiore Medical Center, specifically the Wakefield track. And for those of you who don't know where we are actually in the Bronx, New York. So thanks so much.
Perfect, thank you all. So this is a little snapshot of what we'll talk about in this presentation. We'll cover letters of reg, experiences, and the personal statement, and then lastly is the Q&A. So we'll start off with Dr. Partha for the letters of reg.
All right. Thank you so much, Thanvi, and Mason and Rihanna for the invitation. And I'm super excited to talk to you guys about letters of recommendation. I think a couple of things I'd like to go over is when to ask for these recommendations, who to ask for the recommendations, and what to ask them to actually do for you. Can I get the next screen? Oh, and I think there's a chat saying they need some permission to view the form. Sorry. And if I can get the next slide, please. So I think one of the hardest things for any student is just the anxiety that is related to asking somebody for a letter of recommendation. And I wish there was a way I could tell you that, this is an easy thing. I think depending on different people's personalities and their interactions with their faculty and attendings, it can be easier for some, harder for others. But I want to reassure all of you guys that from a faculty standpoint, we all recognize when it is time for applications to be turned in. We understand and know that our students are going to need letters of recommendation from us. I think those of us in internal medicine, especially as one of the core clerkships, are quite used to having students approach us. So I don't think you need to worry that this is a shocker to an attending that you're going to be asking. And so at least feel a little bit reassured in that. Why is it important to ask the right people and make an effort to get a good letter of recommendation? Is truthfully, you really want it to be a personal and non-generic letter. Yes, letter writers are doing a lot of letter writing during application season, but there are ways, and I'll go over some of those tips that I can offer you to help you create a more personalized letter for yourself, because in this day and age of AI, I think more and more letter writers are incorporating AI to help them write these letters. So what is it that we as the folks asking for letters can do to help improve our success? One of the biggest things, though, I would advise you all is be mindful of who you're asking for a letter. Make sure that this is someone who has seen you, perform your best. You want to set yourself up for success. And it's totally appropriate when you're first meeting and attending on a clerkship that you need a letter from, is just to straight up at the end of your first day to say, Dr. So-and-so, I would really like to get a letter of recommendation from you at the end of this week because I'm applying for residency in XYZ. What would you recommend, or what would you like to see for you to feel comfortable writing me a very strong letter of recommendation? And that's going to be a clear ask. You kind of want to make it apparent to your writer that you're going to ask for a letter. You want them to know if you're applying into internal medicine or surgery, or what type of residency program you're applying to. And once you take that next step and reach out with a letter in follow-up, you can most certainly be a little prescriptive on what your hopes are of what they would like, what you would like them to focus on. For instance, you might have one attending who really saw you at your best in your interactions with patients and your clinical care. You might have another attending who you've done research with, who can really speak to your scientific prowess, and another one perhaps who you did some type of procedural elective with, who can speak to your technical skills. So it's perfectly okay and appropriate to ask each letter writer to focus on perhaps a different aspect of your skill set to highlight for your future programs to review. Can I get the next slide, please? So you've settled with Dr. So-and-so that they're going to be willing to write you a letter. And so when you write them a formal request via email, it's helpful to be ready with all the information that they would need from you. And this is that kind of helpful information. You want to send your CV, you want to send a personal statement so they understand all that you have done already, what your personal statement and your ideology is. I know you guys will be getting some good tips here on what to include in that personal statement. What I tell my students to include, or residents when they're applying for fellowship, is do you have evaluations that are from other rotations, from other classes that speak to how well you've done? All of that information can help show your letter writer what a well-rounded student you are, and I would include all of those. I would be very clear on what your deadline is. I need this letter to be submitted to ERAS by whatever. My tip would be to put that deadline a week or so before your actual deadline, so you're not scrambling towards the end. Perhaps ask them if it would be okay for you to send them periodic reminders. A lot of letter writers truly want to do right by their students, but just are so busy that they would actually appreciate getting some reminders. And lastly, I would encourage you to provide some answers to some questions that I'll review over to help you personalize your letter. If I could get the next slide. I didn't want to over text this, so I'm going to read these off, and you guys, if you feel like this could be of help, can note them down. I want to credit Dr. Kimberly Manning for this idea. I've used it a lot for my letters that I've written, and it's really helped me create some personalized letters. What I would do is, when you write to your letter writers, you can tell them, my mentor suggested I provide you some of these answers to help you in your letter writing to make it easier for you. And the questions I have my students answer is, what are your strongest attributes and what are you most proud about yourself? What have you done that could set you apart from other applicants? How would your peers or teammates describe you? What would you want to make sure the programs know about you and your candidacy? And then this is an optional one. What hardships If you're open to sharing, have you experienced that might cause you to be misunderstood? Again, totally optional, and different students have different experiences. And lastly, 3 words you would like to see in your letter in support of your candidacy. If you provide answers to this and send it to different letter writers, just a reminder, please change your answers for each letter writer so they're not all writing the same letter for you. But I have found utilizing my students' answers to be very helpful in me personalizing their letters. My last thing I would say is this isn't the time to be humble. Utilize impactful words and language and be clear about what you're proud of and what you have done. This isn't the time to sort of downplay your skill set, because this is your chance for your letter writers to advocate on your behalf. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Partha, for all of that. Next, we have experiences from Dr. Raghavan.
Thanks so much. Again, thank you for having me here. This is, this section about experiences in ERAS has changed over the last number of years. And so I think the way that programs have been using this section has evolved over time. And so I anticipate a lot more questions will come up than just what I've answered here. But what I'm really going to talk about before the Q&A at the end is, what should you really include in your experiences? What should you consider leaving out in that ERAS section? What do the most meaningful experiences mean, and how do you select which ones they're going to be? And then what's really being sought in that impactful experiences section, which is different than the most meaningful. So, you can probably guess that they're looking for different experiences that you've had in this ERAS section. And that includes a bunch of pre-selected categories that you can select through the ERAS application itself. I've kind of highlighted some of them and combined some of them a little bit here, but a lot of them are the activities that you've taken on potentially as clubs or extracurriculars while you've been in medical school. A lot of folks talk about the work that they've done, as it's become increasingly popular to take time between medical school and residency. And so folks may have worked as a scribe or done their certification to be an EMT and worked as an EMT. Even customer service roles and roles that are not directly related to medicine and the medical field are, can highlight a lot of really amazing things about you, characteristics that you have or skills that you've built while doing that job. And so these are kind of the larger areas that you want to talk about. Some particular things I'm not sure exactly who's in the audience, so just to point out, for folks who either took a lot of time off between college and med school, or you've had a little bit of a, like you don't have a standard 4-year timeline for medical school, you want to be sure to use your experiences to really build in the timeline. So this very often applies to folks who are going to medical school outside the US and kind of coming to do residency in the US, where they may have graduated medical school some time ago also and have some years in between. So if they've done clinical experiences in the US as observerships or mini externships, you should definitely list all those experiences. Because as on the program side, what I really want to know is what's been happening during all of this time in between, and how are you learning and growing and changing? And then kind of beyond that, what you're really using this section to do is to highlight who you are. What are you passionate about? Why medicine, right? So you're going to talk about why your particular field, why you went into medicine in general, in your personal statement. But this is where you kind of highlight all the activities that led up to that, the kind of evidence behind all the larger kind of statements that you make in your personal statement. And when I'm reviewing experiences, I really want to know what you're passionate about. So then, you've done quite a lot of things, I'm sure, over the last number of years. So how do you decide which are the ones that you're going to include? Because you can only include 10, and you can only mark 3 of those 10 as your most meaningful experiences. So I would, when you're really thinking about which those 10 are, you want to highlight things that highlight that passion, right? And you want to choose things where you've really shown some sort of a commitment. You certainly want, if you have had leadership positions, for example, these folks, lovely folks who are running this workshop today as part of the PAMSA leadership. So highlighting that type of work that you're doing through, or service that you're doing rather, through your activities is really a way to separate yourself, right? To show how unique you are in your application. Hobbies also, I don't have it as a separate section here, but hobbies do fall into this experiences section. Sometimes hobbies or work or significant activities, especially before medicine, before your life in medicine, matter. So if you were like a concert violinist for a bunch of years before you really got to this point, it highlights a lot about who you are, dedication, different skills that you've built, potentially around problem solving, around dependability. And so all of those characteristics that you want to show, if you want to show that those are the things that you're strong in, these activities can help you to highlight that. This is not a CV. And so just to remember that you really want to pick these things that highlight exactly what helps you stand out from the larger pool of applicants. So then how do you move into selecting your most meaningful 3? Answering those questions that that I mentioned a little bit earlier, like who are you, what are you most passionate about, and which were the activities that helped you grow the most? That's also really impactful when I read it. Not impactful in the most impactful experience that I'll talk about a little bit later, but when I'm reading an application and I see that somebody has a clear theme in the things that they've found to be meaningful, that they've really grown a lot through participating in particular activities, it helps me feel out whether this is somebody who's going to thrive in my residency program environment or not maybe enjoy taking care of the particular population that we take care of, or not, or want to focus on some of the additional opportunities that exist within my program. So I'm really looking not just for somebody who qualifies kind of on paper as like a top student. I'm looking for somebody who really wants to train with me and wants to be in the environment that my residents are in, and they're going to have a great time and learn a ton of medicine and be a great doc at the end of it. So those are, the showing your growth through your meaningful experiences, I think, is a really great way to highlight who you are and how you fit in a particular learning environment in particular. So what do you not want to include? This is not a place to list and like to have an exhaustive list of every single thing you've ever done. Some of the questions that often come up are, should I include things I've done in college? Yeah, I mean, if you did something for 4 years in college, you showed a real commitment to it, you had a leadership position in it, or you did something for a while between college and medical school, like these are all things that you can include. So just the actual timing of it, like the number of, the year in which you started doing something is not what determines if it's a really old activity. But if you volunteered for someone or at something for 3 months in your freshman year of college, that does not go in your experiences section because it doesn't really speak to who you are now as you apply for residency. Moving into like something that you participated in one time, if that one thing was, something that was really, really meaningful to you because it challenged you in a particular way and you grew, you could make a case for including something like that. But typically you want to show that you were really passionate about something and that it created an impact on you. this is not the place to list your abstracts and your manuscripts. There's a separate research section for that, but that question does come up quite a lot. When you list your research experiences, what you're listing is what you learned through participating in research, not the abstract that came out of it, not the manuscript that came out of it, but what were you working on? What was your role? And so that moves into kind of the other not to include. If you really don't remember what you did in a particular activity, probably didn't mean so much to you. So don't put that down there. You will, anything on your ERAS application is fair game in your interview. And so if you put down something that you're not prepared to talk about, interviewers could be surprised and feel like, oh, you highlighted this as one of your 10 activities and you can't really talk about it. They'll question the veracity of the statement also. And so you don't want to get caught in that. And then again, not just that you don't remember your role, but that you can't describe the activity or the experience in detail, because when questions about experiences come up, it's often, what did you learn from that experience? How did you grow? What challenges did you face? And you need to be able to describe all of those things to be able to really show your passion and show how you stand above the crowd. And then finally, you don't want to overlap everything with your personal statement or with the content that you go over typically with your student advisor that goes in your medical students performance evaluation or your XPE. If they're all exactly perfectly aligned, you just have a lot of repetition in your application. So you want to, use this as an opportunity, this section as an opportunity to highlight other things about your commitments and your passions. So the final question that really comes up about this section is that there's a separate question about impactful experiences. So meaningful is the meaningful experiences that you highlight, which are 3 of your 10 experiences, are the things that you really want to show that you are passionate about. Impactful experiences, not everybody will necessarily have an answer to. What the question is really asking is whether you had any real obstacles during medical school, or potentially the time before medical school, kind of leading into your career as you start. And so if there was something that really impacted your journey and maybe made that distance traveled greater, if there, very commonly we see personal illness stories in this section. You may see other kind of socioeconomic difficulties of getting into a particular track or into medicine listed in the impactful experiences section. But by and large, most students are not actually filling out this section because this is not a standard section that we expect to see something in. This is a way to explain something that may have affected your path as you were on your way to where we meet you, and that you had to overcome. And so it helps us to see who you are a little bit differently and how you arrived at the place that you are at, and understand what hardships you really had to kind of go through. And then just to remember that you don't have to explicitly state that your impactful experience had something to do with your meaningful experiences, but if you overcame a particular challenge and then you volunteered for a foundation that helps folks overcome such a challenge, or you have a leadership position and something like that, it's clear to kind of see that as a full circle without having to necessarily list it out in your application.
Okay, thank you so much for that comprehensive look on how to figure out what experiences to include. Finally, we have Dr. Kajita with the personal statement.
So I am super lucky because I'm following 2 really excellent speakers who really have said so much about what makes the foundation of a personal statement, and you're going to see a lot of themes repeated in what I'm about to say. The personal statement, for some reason, has, at least in my experience, turned into this somewhat painful exercise that everyone leaves until the very end, just before they submit their application, because it feels big. And I want to let you know that you don't need to do that. You can start it right away. You can work on it in bits. It doesn't have to be painful if you just want to get started. The second thing I want to say about it that I've learned in my experience from talking to people who are applying largely for fellowship is that I think people feel that there's some sort of way that you can read the mind of the person who's going to be reading your personal statement and sort of craft something for that person. Note that this is a personal statement. This is about you. And honestly, all of us who are reading your personal statement really just want to know about you and know about what you care about and know why you're here. So don't feel that there is an absolute formula or that you're trying to, quote, game the system. Write your personal statement about yourself using many of the tips that have already been discussed. And so when I say make it personal, do all of the things that Dr. Raghavan just said about what you want to include. And keep it simple. You really don't need to include everything about your life, as long as it's all really about you and in your voice. One of the things that we tend to do is we tend to be a little bit modest. Please give yourself credit for what you've done. You've made it this far. You are all really impressive people. Be proud of that. Share that. We want to know about that. And when in giving yourself credit, this is not about itemizing all of your accomplishments. This is about really saying something about yourself, particularly maybe what you've been proud of, what has brought you to medicine. Don't repeat your CV. And because you want this to be in your own voice, please do not use ChatGPT or AI. This is a whole new frontier. There are probably going to be better rules about how to use it in the future. It's okay if it doesn't sound like classic literature. This is you again, okay? Be honest and don't stretch things to make it sound more impressive because let's say the Olympics are on. You can say, I played soccer in college, but you don't have to turn it into I was on the Olympics team, right? Because someone's going to ask you about it, right? Only include stuff that you can really talk about. It's okay on the same note to not have too much stuff in there. This is about quality stuff, okay? It doesn't have to be 2 pages. In fact, you want to keep it 1 page. You want to keep it tight. You want someone to read it for typos and proofreading and for how it's phrased, right? If your reader who's a friend maybe can be honest with you and faculty and say, this is kind of boring, you're kind of trying too hard, that's okay. That's why you're going to give yourself time from the beginning, because it's like crafting any good essay. It's going to take multiple rewrites. Okay? But don't be intimidated by it. You can all do it. You've all done statements like this before. Now, some people have some questions about how to format your personal statement. What do I start with? Is there any one way to do it? There really isn't. I usually tell people you can start with an anecdote if you like. But we are always, thank you for advancing the slide. And that's often what people do. And that to a point where it's almost become a formula, but it can be a positive. It's a good way to start. And maybe that's not where you end up. But the classic, to the point that as readers, we sometimes kind of all laugh in a kind way, mind you. Oh, this is familiar. We know where this is going. Fill in the family member had a heart attack, ended up in the emergency room. You did CPR in the field. They survived, and this is why you want to become a doctor. Okay, that's great, but it's not necessary. Some of you have never had this kind of crisis. You may have other reasons. Do not feel that you have to fit things into a formula. Similarly, I get asked this a lot, and I see it done well sometimes and not so well. Think about whether or not, if you want to start your essay with a quote from Dr. William Osler, because it's a medical quote, don't do it to impress us. Do your quote if it's something that really means a lot to you, okay? And the quote doesn't have to be a famous person, but we're also used to seeing the quote that my grandfather said, fill in the blank, about you should become a doctor, okay? You don't need to do that either, okay? If it means a lot to you and you can tell a story, which includes things about why you are the right person for this particular residency, go ahead, okay? The reason why I say maybe or maybe not on this slide is because put it out there and then have someone look at it and see if it seems genuine, okay? Because this, again, is about you. Please do not recycle your med school applications, okay? I see people do this, and you're already so much more impressive by the fact that you've gotten into med school and you've done all of these things. You're not the same person, not just in accomplishments, but in your insights and your personality. You've grown. Please don't recycle the old application. Finally, some people have asked, well, I really want to stand out. I want to do something different. They will try to do things like write essays in iambic pentameter. One wrote an essay about going to Shake Shack. Okay, this is a real essay. Okay, it was a remarkably successful essay, but that doesn't mean that it's the best essay for you. It might be entertaining, but it might not be what the program director is looking for you. Remember, this is a representation of you, and we're not looking for fireworks. We're looking for you. So please, if you are an amazing writer, you have a talent for it, go ahead. You know, if this is one of those things that you want to include in your experiences or really makes you stand out, be my guest. But it's not necessary. Use good judgment around these things. And always, always, a lot of people want to help you succeed. And we are a friendly audience. Okay. So please, please don't be afraid to share your work before you submit it. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. The personal statement is always a huge obstacle to overcome in these applications. So your advice is very helpful. Next, we have some FAQs. First, what to write for hometown. If anyone wants to address that.
I might just speak up only because I think between me, Dr. Kajita, and Dr. Raghavan, I am from a program in a relatively smaller town and a less populous state. So the only advice here I would have is, you know, we don't need 10 different hometowns of every place you have ever lived. However, where this can be somewhat useful for programs like mine in Tucson, where yes, we do kind of look through and see what an Arizona connection might be, because, you know, we want applicants who are really serious about coming here. Is if you did not go to undergrad or medical school in a particular state or location that's a bit smaller, but you do have some connection, like maybe you did live here, you know, between birth and 6th grade, I think that can be helpful to signal to a program in a smaller location that, hey, I actually do have some connection to Arizona. So me living in Iowa right now, applying to Tucson isn't as crazy as it might look, even though I went to undergrad in Michigan and medical school in Chicago, and I grew up in Iowa. That's where my permanent address is. So sometimes the hometown, if it's a legitimate connection to a place, might be a great way to sort of slide in a little bit of an indication to a program in a less popular location or city or state that you do in fact have a connection, a personal connection to that place.
So if I could add a comment to that, people have lots of options. You can fill in more than one hometown, but going back to the whole issue of is it meaningful? Remember, someone's going to ask you about your hometown potentially. So make sure it really is a substantial connection to that town and not just the 2 months you spent there on vacation with your family because you want to impress someone.
Okay. Next, is it useful to apply to many more programs than number of signals you have as an applicant? And geographic versus program signaling. Thoughts?
I think this, so all three of us happen to be from internal medicine. And so I think the answer to this question really varies based on the specialty that you're applying into. In internal medicine, this is it's typical to apply to many more programs than the number of signals that you have. Most folks are applying pretty broadly, whether that's in a particular geographic region or not, or if they're just applying widely around the country. That's very normal in internal medicine. In some really competitive fields, a lot of programs actually do look really mainly at the folks who have signaled them. So I know in dermatology, this is a significant way that folks try to limit the number of applications that they're reviewing. And so a lot of dermatology programs, especially in very populous cities, do use the signals as a way to essentially say, these are the folks that I'm going to really review first. They may continue to review after, but if they fill their number of interview slots with folks that have signaled them, those are going to be folks that are really getting that preference in a very competitive field. And then geographic versus program signaling, again, in very, very competitive fields, I think program signaling really carries the strength over geographic signaling, whereas in fields like pediatrics, family medicine, internal medicine, there are or kind of larger number of programs. Geographic signaling carries a significant amount of weight, because if there are a large number of programs in a particular field, in a particular area, you may not be able to signal all of the programs in that area, even if you're very interested in living in that particular area. And so programs that have, or specialties that have a lot of programs in a particular area may use geographic signaling, even maybe preferentially over program signaling. And then finally, the competitiveness, I guess, of the actual program itself also probably determines to some degree the answer to this.
Okay, thank you for that. And finally, what is good etiquette for attending virtual open houses? Maybe Dr. Kajita, if you wanted to take that one.
Sure, and I'm sure other people will have some opinions on this. I think the main thing is that you are present, that you are courteous to not just the faculty, but your colleagues. I found that at some open houses, it turns into a little bit of a competition to impress. Just if you have a question, ask, and certainly collaborate with your participants, because you're going to be seeing a lot of each other on the interview trail. It's important that you can start some of these relationships now. Do all of the appropriate things that you do on a Zoom call, and all of those things in terms of muting, not having a lot of noise in the background, those kinds of things that you would do in any type of meeting. I'm not sure what specifically this question was addressing. Maybe Rihanna, I think you were the one who brought it up. Is there anything in particular that we can answer for you?
I was curious more along the lines of like reaching out to programs after you attended an open house, or what's the etiquette there? Because I know contacting programs, you don't want to contact them too much, but if something's meaningful, like how do you approach that?
Okay, that's a great question. My answer to that is I don't mind at all, and I appreciate a short thank you. However, I would prefer that once you thank me, thank you, that you don't need to continually send more thank yous. I'm interested in this. I like this so much about your program. A simple thank you is more than enough for me, and I'm curious as to what the other faculty think.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say etiquette wise, the thing to remember is, granted, there might be a lot of people online, but you can be remembered both for being positive and for being negative. Some of the residents who are online definitely give feedback of, oh, this one student was really, whatever, XYZ, either positive or negative. So if you're really serious about a program and are showing up to the open house, I would say bring your A game, know about the program, be a little bit ready with some really good specific questions to indicate, hey, I've really looked at your website, I know about your program. And those are ways to kind of set yourself up a little bit so that if like a chief resident is online, there's no faculty, that chief might say, oh, there was, a student named Rihanna. She really seemed very interested and super excited and polite. And, we'd love to have her versus, oh gosh, there was this one student who all they were concerned about is how many vacation days they're going to get and what's the days off. And so just realizing that what you're saying can often really help or sometimes, unfortunately, be negative for you.
I also want to highlight that it's a little bit of a like a first date situation, and that you are also assessing the program, right? This is usually your slightly more extended way of being able to hang out with some of the house staff who are currently in the program and get a sense of if these are people that you'd want to spend a lot of hours in like somewhat stressful situations with. And you want to, I mean, certainly you don't want your questions to focus on the schedule and the vacation, because typically that's all included either on the website or in some of the materials on your recruitment day. But to really get to know, what connects people in the program, and showing that level of interest. So knowing a lot about the program for sure, but showing a level of kind of like extra interest of what would it be like to really be in this program, also can often get noticed as kind of a passion for that program.
Okay, perfect. So last, we have about 15 minutes left and we'll do the Q&A session now. I think Mason and Rihanna have been combining all the questions together. So if you wanted to tell us the first couple of questions.
Sure, I will bring those questions up. Thank you all for submitting your questions. We may not get to all of them, but we'll try to prioritize the ones that apply to most of the people. We got a question. I think it kind of a little bit goes along the lines of, what not to do, as Dr. Raghavan mentioned, and also, some of the open house etiquette. But as application reviewers, what are some of the common red flags that you'll see on a person's personal statement or their ERAS application overall?
I think this is a tough one, but Sri, thank you. You first.
I was gonna say that if there's something that makes you stand out in a particular way, like you had to repeat something, or there's going to be a statement about something that's not the most positive in your MSPE, which typically medical schools now allow you to see, even if you can't edit. That should be explained somewhere. And a red flag for me is not that actual thing, the like repetition of a clerkship or something like that. The red flag is really not knowing what happened, and potentially, as a reviewer, I think maybe the student didn't realize that this is really significant and didn't use it as a learning opportunity. But I want to see that there was a reflection about that particular experience.
Great, thank you. Dr. Kajita, Dr. Partha, anything to add?
I would definitely emphasize what Dr. Raghavan mentioned. Yeah, you definitely want to see an explanation. And I don't know that this would be a red flag, but perhaps something, I think both to what Dr. Raghavan and Kajita reviewed over, what is meaningful experiences. If, someone just has a list of volunteer activities and they're each just one day for 2 hours, and that's what fills their application. Again, like I said, not a red flag, but perhaps, this person might be stretching for experiences and working on quantity over quality. So it might just dilute the competitiveness of an application.
I would agree with both of this. And the only other thing, which isn't obvious, is having a lot of mistakes, right, on your application. If it's an important thing to you, and if it feels like maybe you're not paying attention, or if you're not as careful as we would hope you would be, if there are a lot of typos, grammatical errors, spelling errors, you spelled, your own name incorrectly. I've seen that before. I would worry a little bit about that. So that's an easy one. Just be careful.
The one random thing, and I feel kind of silly saying this, but see what your picture is saying about you. Like, is it just a nice, nobody is looking for an expensive, fancy picture, but do you have a nice expression on your face? Is your hair combed and are you looking put together? For the most part, we see great pictures, but every so often we do see pictures that kind of grab our attention, and that might not be really the way you want to grab a reviewer's attention, is by a picture that's kind of standing out for being a little too dramatic, or somebody just threw something on and took a picture.
Great. Great. Thank you. It sounds like, be forthcoming, be honest with your application, and also double, triple check your work. We received another question, a couple questions regarding the letters of recommendation. One of the questions was just asking what type of letter writers are recommended. If you have a research mentor versus clinical versus your clerkship director, and kind of what's the recommended number of letters to get.
I mean, most oftentimes you'll need 3 letters of recommendation. One of them might be your, chair letter from your department. Different schools will have different people writing that letter. In our institution, it's our I am clerkship director, and it's co-signed by the chair. I would say most certainly you want somebody who's going to be in your field that you are applying to. So if you are applying to surgery, you need a surgeon. If you're applying to medicine, you need someone in medicine. You definitely want to look for people who are going to be able to write a good quality letter, not someone that was, they're super well known in their field, but I worked with them for 2 days. So for the sake of that, you don't want somebody to give you like a 1-paragraph meaningless letter just because they're a star in the field. So you really want to look for quality letters, and then from the specialty that you are applying to. And if you don't have all the letters from that specialty, usually it's going to be helpful to have folks who've had more of your core clerkship experiences, who have spent a little bit more time with you. But if you're really passionate about research and that's what your career is going to head towards, obviously I would definitely have your research mentor letter speaking to your skill set there.
Great, thanks. And, just to piggyback off that question, someone else asked, kind of relating to quality of letters, for fourth year med students who are doing sub-Is and they're rotating at your institution, if they don't feel like they're getting a lot of time with the PDs, should they still try to ask the PD, or should they try to focus their attention and ask the attending that they spent more time with?
I tend to be a fan of the person who knows you better. I mean, a PD letter, PDs also, just so they're cautious, right? Because, they know sometimes that their letters carry some weight. And so unfortunately, sometimes those letters, hopefully the PD would be frank about saying that, I think someone else might write you a better letter. But the person who knows you and has seen what you can do in your sub-I in an actual clinical setting, that's great. I think from myself, if it's a strong faculty letter from your sub-internship, I think that's great.
I would say the other part of that, and I agree with Dr. Kajita completely, is that in certain specialties that are smaller, a lot of the faculty will know each other from around the country because they network at conferences, and they've spent a bunch of time in that area of expertise. And so if they see a letter from someone that they know, even peripherally, they may reach out to that person and ask, like, oh, what was it really like to work with this candidate that I'm really interested in? And if the response is like, well, I got asked for this letter, I didn't really know the person that well, that's not so great. And it's much better to have a letter from somebody who's gonna really, stand in your corner and talk about why you're a great person to recruit.
I might just add too, for the student to double check what the culture is in that program, because I know for us, like our PD does not write letters for visiting sub-Is. I mean, she will write them if she's there attending, but if they're rotating, with me, she's not going to write a letter. So, versus students thinking that's the culture and what they need to do, they should kind of check ahead of time what's traditionally done or expected, but completely agree with Dr. Kajita and Raghavan to ask the person you've worked with, not the person who has the higher job title.
Great, thank you. We have the three of you amazing PDs and APDs, and you're all in the internal medicine area. So we have a couple questions that are a little more tailored to the IM residency. We had a question asking what the best way to find the virtual open house is for IM programs.
So there might be kind of different definitions of this because there are the kind of meet and greets when you've applied for a program. So that's going to come directly from the program and be highlighted to you. Otherwise, different programs that have virtual open houses for larger groups of folks in a particular area from a particular background or particular set of interests. Those will usually come out through interest groups, advertising to interest groups or advertising to student advisors through your medical school. I know at Mount Sinai, where I am, the way that the programs really have a kind of before we're able to see ERAS, before you guys finish submitting all your ERAS applications, our virtual open houses are advertised to medical schools around the country to advertise to their students. So that they can join and see what our programs are all about. And we usually do kind of a combined virtual open house across specialties, and then we break out into breakout groups so that folks can kind of meet the PDs in their specialty.
I just did a quick search on Google, and it seems like, for internal medicine programs, they might be specific to the school. So you might, y'all might have some luck finding the specific programs you're interested in and then seeing if they have an open house. I know some specialties like anesthesiology, they have like a central hub that lists all the open houses. So I would think that might also be helpful as well. Another question for kind of internal medicine, but also subspecialty related. In your ERAS or personal statement, should you include your interest about these subspecialties? For example, if you have a passion in cardiology or any of the other subspecialties.
So I'll take the first crack at this one. I think that there are a group of people who know from day one what they want to be, and that's great. And there are other people who don't know or think they know and change their minds. So when I read certain personal statements for residency, and they come in wanting to do cardiology and then they change their mind, that's okay. I think the more important thing is it a coherent personal statement that talks about them and why they want to do cardiology, particularly, right? 50% of them who come to me change their minds, but the personal statement was still great. So I think that some people worry that they will be pegged in a way that, oh, we can't support that particular interest, or we have too many people who want to become this particular thing. So, but you don't know if this is a program you're interested in. Think about that as well. What is this program like? You also want to think about when you write your personal statement. In some ways, that may also help you think about which programs you're most interested in and how you rank them, because sometimes that also helps define what your future career goals are. So I would say sorry, I'm so ambivalent about everything, but there's no hard and fast rule about it, as long as it's honest and it's you.
I will note that sometimes programs use specialty interest information to like if they have resident buddies that they pair you up with after you match, they'll use those kinds of shared interests to say, hey, you know, I've got a second year who's also interested in cardiology, so I'll pair you up. And so if you're really, you know, very interested in that sort of matchup, and it makes a difference to you and how you transition into residency, it could be helpful. But then there are definitely programs, probably not the majority of PDs that I know. Certainly when I was doing my own recruitment as PD, I didn't use specialties to say, like, I'm not gonna, you know, rank this many people who want to go into cardiology or GI or something. But there are definitely programs that do use that that type of criteria where they want to have a mix of folks in their class, somebody who wants to go into rheumatology and someone going to allergy, and not a class that's like split between GI cards and like chemo.
Just keep in mind that when you interview on that personal statement, your program does not want to hear all about you being a future cardiologist, but first why you're going to be an amazing internal medicine resident for them. So just watch how you sell yourself, because that could be off-putting if your whole interview is about your passion for cardiology when you're not applying for a fellowship at that moment.
All right, thank you very much. It looks like we're about to approach the 9 o'clock mark Eastern time. So that'll be our last question. But you know, first of all, we want to thank Dr. Kajita, Dr. Raghavan, and Dr. Partha for coming and speaking about the ERAS and personal statement, and really helping us neurotic third and fourth year med students and aspiring physicians kind of get their bearings. I believe our panelists have also agreed to share their emails or contact information. So, you know, if you have any lingering questions or interests, you can feel free to reach out to them as well. And lastly, we will be having our Interview 101 panel in September. It's kind of our monthly series. So be on the lookout for that from our PAMSA Leadership Committee. And thank you all for coming. We hope to see you next month. Anything else, Rihanna, Dunby? Great. Thank you, Dr. Kajita, Dr. Raghavan, Dr. Partha.